Okay, so if you've just landed on this video, I just want to set a preface. If you've chosen to engage before watching this video, if you've just relapsed and you've come onto this video, completely understand where you're at right now. I had that constant mental conflict, that shame, that really just feeling crap about myself, really feeling like that bad mental health come over me. And before I get into the principles, I just want to let you know that you can feel good right now. You can just ground yourself in the moment. And again, we're going to go into a bit of this sort of principles, and hopefully it's going to help you. And also, I just want this video to be like a light of hope for anyone watching, because I was in the situation for such a long time, 17 years of full-time addiction, actively trying to quit for about 9 of them, been through paid programs, been through all the free methods, and this method, the BC method that you're going to sort of get an introduction to today, really changed everything for me. So guys, we'll get into it now. All right, so we're going to go over the very popular first point of contention, which is counting days. So counting days is very popular, and we've all been very fond of it at some point or another. And so typically when we all sort of start our process of stopping our behavior with pornography and masturbation, we come across NoFap, and one of the core sort of metrics of measuring success within that method is that of counting days, going on streaks. So for example, you have these milestones where you go for 15 days of no pornography, 30 days, 60 days, and the good old 90 days benchmark plus of staying away from pornography and masturbation. And it's very promoted within these communities, very promoted within these quit pornography apps, and even some of these blockers, and even some of these points of resources such as yourbrainonporn.com. And these, all this sort of mentality of streaks comes from, I would say, from a place of good intention and well-meaning sort of advice. It makes sense to sort of break up your progress into streaks and count days and measure on a, give a metric to the whole thing. But the problem is that when we sort of use this method of counting days, it can expose us to sort of disadvantageous thinking when it comes to stopping pornography and masturbation. It exposes us to a lot of addict thinking, or junkie thinking, as I'd like to call it. And the one thing I want to start off with is that, being in this, having been in the addiction for, full time for 17 years, being actively trying to quit for 9 of them, and going through the trials of going through paid programs and free methods and advice, trying all these things, counting days seems to be this issue where it can sort of help people perhaps mentally. However, it really isn't a good metric of actually measuring how free you feel from the addiction within the moment. The problem is that typically when we reach one of these milestones, let's say we reach 30 days. In fact, what I'll just say is my story. So when on the NoFap method, the highest streak I managed to reach was about 23 days. And when I reached 23 days, I typically felt all the symptoms of being in the full-time addiction even then. So I was like, damn, I really want to engage. I really want to sort of relapse right now. It's going to feel great. And what that sort of led me to was, when I chose to engage after the 23 days, when I didn't know how to handle the urges, and we go through the whole problem of the urges feeling super overwhelming and not knowing what to do with them and not knowing how to process them correctly, I would, relapse, and I would feel like a lot worse after the longer streaks, like breaking the longer streaks, than I would actually, going through periods of 2 to 3 days relapsing, and those short periods, right? And so it can lend ourselves, but we can put ourselves in a situation where we're lending ourselves to a lot of deprecative thinking. Oh, look, people on the NoFap forum are going 60 days and 90 days. Why can't I, do as well as them? What's wrong with me? Like, what am I not doing right? Why aren't I strong enough, right? And the thing with this is that you start to build a lot of comparison fatigue, that I like to call it, where you're comparing yourselves to others. Why am I doing well as another person? And you feel that there's actually something wrong with you. Start to feel all this junky thinking, start to feel this addictive thinking, which is expected, as I'll come on to next. But all this addictive thinking that starts facilitating thoughts which think, look, there's something wrong with my desires. There's something wrong with, my sexual tastes. Like, why can't I stop this? Everyone else is living a normal life, but I'm living in shame. I'm living in so much guilt, putting so much pressure on myself. Why can't I stop? Why can't I go X days, right? And going back to the counting days thing, if you're going to use it as a metric, don't put your heart and soul into it. Don't, give it this meaning of how well I'm doing, because truly you can feel good right now. You don't have to be X days off pornography to feel good in the moment. You don't need to be off pornography X days to feel free from the addiction in the moment, given that you have the right tools, as long as you have the right way of processing urges and the right way of going about things, the right way of thinking, the right mental stance to handle all of this. But yeah, guys, so counting days isn't a good measure. It's not a good measure of success. And I learned that the hard way. So going back to what I was saying about the whole feeling of shame, feeling of disappointment, once you choose to engage, once you relapse, and it typically, there's a sort of trend where the longer the NoFap streak that you go on and then you choose to engage, the worse the self-deprecating thoughts, the worse the self-talk, the more impactful the disappointment that comes after that. So, it is very expected, and it really lends itself to this understanding that I have now of how addictive neural pathways function, of how they work, of how they utilize this negative thought patterns that you have, utilizes it to put you back in the cycle, to keep you in that thinking of, I'm not feeling good enough. I failed again. I'll never be able to quit. And this by design is from the design of addictive neural pathways, that is to keep you in this cycle of wanting to keep on engaging, because at the end of the day, your mind is currently wired to want, to desire compulsively a mind mood altering experience. And so any way that it can get you to engage, it will take that route and try to get you to engage in whatever means possible. And usually what that looked like for me and many others is that because we're in this constant loop of negative thinking, this constant loop of self-deprecation, disappointment, feeling that we're never going to be able to quit. How am I going to be able to quit? I've relapsed every single time. I told myself I'd stop and then I relapsed again. Like, there's something wrong with me. And the addictive neural pathways really take advantage of this, not in a malicious way. It's just designed that way. To feel more of the good feelings, such as the delta FOSB, the dopamine, all that stuff, which isn't important right now. But all these feel-good chemicals, it wants to feel again and again and again. And that's part of the active addiction. And so it wants to keep you in that state of wanting more, wanting to engage again. And your addicted mind, in its current state, in its current composition of neural wiring, it will just keep on trying to get you into that. And that's why quitting pornography is classically known as a very difficult situation, and a difficult situation to deal with, and a difficult addiction to beat, quote unquote. Especially if you don't have the right tools or the understanding of how to approach the problem correctly. So when it comes to the Beyond Compulsion method, what do we do when we're dealing with the whole issue of counting? Well, we don't count. We don't actually focus on any sort of time metric at all. How it works is we just stay rooted in the present moment, as what we understand is when we have compulsive desires, when we're in a full-time addiction, when we are, being given all these urges, all these junky thoughts, all these addictive thoughts, all these unanswerable questions which naturally come up, which we expect to come up when we're in this situation. We deal with them in the moment when they come. by using the tools and the methods that we learn in the Beyond Compulsion Academy with the from the Beyond Compulsion method, that is, such as a 5-fact script, such as the education of being in the correct mental stance and knowing what to expect. And we just deal with things as they come, moment by moment, and don't focus on anything in the future, don't focus on counting anything, because if we were to go back to that thinking, we'd just be focusing on the wrong stuff. Because when you're in a full-time addiction, you want to process everything correctly and feel free within the moment and have the confidence to deal with whatever comes up related to urges, related to negative thinking, related to junky thoughts within the present moment. Okay, so the next thing I want to address is the issue of willpower, or Trojan horse willpower, as I like to call the alternate term, but we'll get onto that bit after. So how does willpower sort of lend itself into the NoFap method of solving things? Well, for example, on the NoFap forum, you'll probably find a post or come across some content that will advise you that, when you feel the urge, when you feel that compulsive desire in the moment, you should go for a run around the block, as I did when to deal with the urge, or do 30, 40, 50 push-ups in that moment. Or perhaps you should go to reading a book, or jumping on a video game, or jumping onto a project, or going outside for a walk. And all these things are actually, they're very good things. They're very good sort of methods of perhaps diverting your attention, of keeping yourself busy. However, the nature of compulsive desire, the nature of being in a full-time addiction, is that the compulsive desire refuses to be ignored. How many times have we come across, this advice, and we've implemented it only for that same urge to come again 2 hours, 3 hours later, or 30 minutes later, for us to be in the same situation again. And what do? We go repeat the process again. I put my shoes on again, go outside and run around the block again, perhaps, but it isn't dealing with the compulsive desire directly. We're not facing the issue directly. We're not actually dealing with the addictive mechanism that's invoking all this desire, this compulsion, this problem that we're trying to solve. And so delaying the effects for a later date by using a substitute behavior within the moment to deal with it as a way of coping with addictive neural pathways certainly isn't a sustainable strategy. And by the nature of going through this process, you'll probably understand that how many times have we tried to use a replacement behavior in order to deal with this addiction, in order to deal with relapses. That's essentially what willpower is, right? Just trying to push through the urges. And even when it comes to stuff such as meditation, another very good practice, holding those thoughts in the moment and really processing them, letting the thoughts flow like clouds through the mind. Again, it's a good practice, but the problem is it's not connecting with the compulsive desire. It's not connecting with addiction, the addictive neural pathways. It isn't facing the addiction itself. And so what we need is a strategy to do that. Otherwise, we're just lending ourselves to willpower. We're trying to push through the urges. We're trying to get through to the next stage of, okay, I've beat the urge now, but it's going to come again, and I'm not looking forward to it. I'm not looking forward to the next urge. I mean, who would, right? But it's this sort of mentality of willpower that keeps us in this cycle, and it keeps us in this sort of grind, this graft of not being able to get out of the situation in a sustainable manner. Just to cover the concept of Trojan horse willpower, as I mentioned earlier. So this is what I like to call a situation where you're using a replacement behavior, such as a hobby that you're into, or a activity that you can engage in to keep your mind off it, and that you find actually enjoyable. And so you might feel that you're on your purpose and doing the right thing by switching to this behavior and being out of the situation of not relapsing. The thing is that because compulsive desire, again, as said before, refuses to be ignored and will keep on invoking itself, because that's the symptom of being in a full-time addiction. We're not dealing with the compulsive desire directly. We're just waiting for the inevitable moment of when it will crop up again. And we're not doing any active rewiring of our addictive neural pathways, by just ignoring it, by just delaying it, or just by, replacing the behavior with something else just to delay it further down the line. And yeah, I've been in this situation before. There's plenty of things that we love doing that we can replace temporarily rather, to stop our behavior with porn and masturbation for that moment. But again, it's going to inevitably come up. The urges are going to come up. The junky thinking is going to come up. The self-deprecating thoughts of, damn, I'm feeling this way and I don't want to be feeling this way. I'm going to go back to my way of dealing with it, only for it to come up again in the future. But look, we all have to face this at some point, but it's about understanding the right way, the right method, and the right tools in order to face it. So to address this within the Beyond Compulsion method, it's the tools, it's the education, it's the usage of repetitive behavior. For example, the 5-fact script, which gives you the power, gives you the confidence, gives you the understanding that you know how to deal with these situations, know how to deal with urges, discomfort, and all those these challenging emotions that we feel when we're going through the withdrawal period of pornography and masturbation. And the other thing I want to say is that when you're in the Beyond Compulsion method, part of the education is making sure that you look forward to these moments, look forward to the moments of intense urges, or any urges for that matter, discomfort or strong emotions, and using the script in those circumstances to actively rewire, proactively rewire, and getting onto the other side of those urges, getting onto the other side of the discomfort is the benefit, is having the self-trust that you know how to deal with it, having the confidence that you know how to deal with it, not feeling that shame, feeling strong, feeling very, very powerful, especially if you've had a long history of years of being stuck in this addiction. And it doesn't matter, whether like you're using material or, engaging with material when you're relapsing that you may deem as something that's out of your actual sexual taste, like in the real world, right? It's just a symptom of the addiction. And it doesn't matter how long you've sort of been in the addiction for, 20 years, 30 years. We have a lot of cases within the Beyond Compulsion Academy where you think, well, I don't know if it's going to work. I've been in too long. It doesn't matter. Your current wiring state of your addictive neural pathways, the composition of your addictive neural pathways is a temporary state. It doesn't mean that they're going to be like that forever, because due to neuroplasticity, it's rewirable, it's malleable, and with the right tools to rewire, it's very achievable. So the other thing I want to say here is that before, when I was in the other programs, I was in, other recovery programs and in recovery groups where I met other people, other guys that were in the same situation as me, where we all had full-time addictions. We were dealing with things, we're sharing our wins, our losses, and all this stuff. And I see a lot of advice which says, okay, well, you need to be with other people, you need to be in groups that you can share with, you can relate to each other with, when it comes to being around other addicts and making sure that you guys are like together in this. You don't want to face this alone. And they're right, you don't want to face it alone. You want to get help. You do want to get a scenario where you're not going through this alone, where you have people pointing you, giving you pointers, and allowing yourself to share with other people, so you can also be shared too, because it's very good to do that. However, what I want to also highlight here is that it also is important that if you're in these groups and you're sharing your wins and losses, you also have the focus on actually focusing on a single process. You collaborate on a single process to actively change your state, change your rewiring, change your neural pathways, actively work on changing that one thing, the one thing that's actually going to get you out of this constant conflict, to get you out of this addiction cycle, so you can live a more congruent life and be out of this constant mental conflict that we've always been in as pornography addicts. We all know the story of just not living congruently with ourselves, and it really is exhausting. But I wanted to say that, yes, it's important to get help, it's important to share, but also make sure you're focusing with that group on a process, collaborating with each other towards a very specific goal with a very specific method in mind. So the third aspect that I want to talk about when it comes to being on the NoFap method is the issue of strength and power when you're in a full-time pornography or masturbation addiction, because when you're in the NoFap communities and when you're on these apps, recovery apps that is, or these communities which offer blockers and solutions, a lot of the content of posts that you see from these community members in them, and it's of course no fault of their own, it's simply addictive neural pathways at work here. It's like one of the best places to observe how addictive neural pathways can affect mental health, because a lot of the content on people's posts are very sort of negative. They're very sort of coming from a place of hopelessness and weakness, and it's very expected to see this because you don't have tools to deal with not just the addiction itself and the behavior and choosing to engage in it, but it's also the sort of cycle, the constant mental conflict, the constant sort of decline in mental health after taking so many losses. And a lot of this is very expected, as I was saying before, but it's also quite crucial to understand that dealing with addictive neural pathways, dealing with life in a full-time addiction is very different when you're coming from a place of strength and power and confidence and choice, as opposed to the opposite, which is feelings of hopelessness, weakness, feeling that you can't get out of it, feeling that you're not good enough, feeling that you cannot quit, you cannot stop the behavior. Quit is, the wording of quit is something for another video, but stopping is probably the better word here. And I just want to sort of highlight that this was a real game changer for me. Like I said, I've been through all these methods. I've been through 2 other paid programs trying to quit this behavior, and I saw this sort of pattern coming up where the people, they were doing the sort of exercises, they were doing the methodology from these programs, but what I noticed was there was this sense of helplessness, sense of powerlessness, sense of not really understanding how to sort of deal with things and where to take them, because of course being in a full-time addiction can be very confusing, and not really understanding sort of where to go and what tools to use and what understanding sort of that confidence really takes a hit on you when you're in that situation, not understanding why you keep on relapsing. And so when you're able to come from a position of strength, a position of power, a position of confidence, because you have the education, you have the tools in order to deal with your compulsive behavior and the moments of compulsive desire that inevitably come with addictive neural pathways when it comes to dealing with a full-time pornography and masturbation addiction, as I did for a good 17 years, it makes sense that we're in this sort of mental struggle all the time. And like I said again, making sure that you're on the right side of that, getting the right tools, getting the right methodology and education is definitely something or somewhere where you want to be, something that you want to have. And again, what I want to do is obviously leave you with something I was mentioning before in the video, and that is, if you've chosen to engage recently, or if you've literally relapsed and you've just come onto this video, guys, choose to feel good right now. I understand it's not very natural. You have those addictive neural pathways kicking in, trying to get you to feel conflicted, trying to get you to feel depressed, trying to get you to feel very ashamed about yourself. But right now, get into the moment. And I was there for 17 years, so trust me, I understand this situation. You can feel good right now. It doesn't matter what you relapse to. It doesn't matter how long you've been relapsing for. Just feel good